Okay. Okay, so we're going live now.
Share the screen.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mark McPherson now. He's going to share some presentation slides with you. And like I said, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section there and we'll respond to them after the presentation. Right. So thanks everyone, and over to you, Mark. Okay. Just need to get your presentation up.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Okay, run it.
Great. Lovely. Okay, let's put that in there. Good everybody. Thanks for attending today. And Kylie's given me a kind introduction, and anything you want to know about me is on the website, and happy to take questions at the end, as Kylie has mentioned. Let us know if you can't hear me. I'm happy to speak up, or we can adjust things here. So I'll move straight in. Today, as Kylie mentioned, we're going to talk about mobile device security, where that intersects with cloud-based usage and security. What are the threats? How do you select a robust and flexible approach for your organization? And what policies and procedures and so on do you put in place? And I'll have a look at a couple of case studies right at the end to highlight some of the issues around this. So without ado, I'll move on to mobile devices. So first of all, what are the uses of mobile devices? What are we currently using it for? And I guess the theme of this presentation will really walk through the fact that people are already using mobile devices in their environments. They're already using cloud-based services. So I'll assume that's happening right now, and just look from the perspective of how do we then secure those environments for use and the best use for our organization. So right now, common uses for mobile devices are some things like identity and access management. Everyone knows the iPhone with the thumbprint reader is a nice convenient way to avoid having to enter all those pesky passwords. It can be used for primary or secondary or second factor authentication, as they call it. The biometrics affords us additional security over that, and also makes it more convenient. So our mobile phones, our mobile devices and tablets are working as a combination of what used to be separate devices, hardware tokens, software, keys, and so on. And it's acting as a one size fits all. Authentication is now rather frictionless because we don't have to enter lots of passwords, or in fact remember lots of passwords all the time. And it's highly available because our staff have probably already got a mobile phone that they can use when they walk into our organization, and so we can just implement that access management immediately, and so long as they're prepared to use their device, or we can issue them with a corporate mobile phone for that use. The mobile office, I guess the thing is that we are now living in an age where everybody can do their work pretty much anywhere on the planet, and they can access a good majority of the office functions from their mobile device, be it a tablet or a phone. And so, not surprisingly, our perimeter has extended out into the world, and it's a little hard to define exactly where that perimeter of our organization starts and finishes. Plus the fact that it's a combination of functions. It not only serves as our office access point, but it can also serve as our personal, social, and maybe family connection as well. And so we're kind of splicing the work-life balance together on that platform. What else is happening? Well, more and more users are demanding that they be able to seamlessly switch between work and personal life and mix that during the day. It makes for a longer work day. Theoretically, there's better productivity because people are getting things done that they would otherwise do during the day, take time off to do. They're getting done in whatever hours it takes, and they're also managing to do work at the same time. So staff mobility and flexibility is pretty important for that matter, and I think the organizations these days are embracing that. It's simply a wave that's crashed over us largely. Now, that's okay. What the uses are. But what about the risks? Well, any mobile device, like any ICT system, can be attacked, hijacked, or damaged. The attacks can be either against the individual whose device that belongs to or they're currently using, or it can also be against the organization. And mobile apps, well, the mobile itself has a number of apps on it. Those apps sometimes collect more data than you're aware of, and whilst that's usually okay, you can, are we okay on the sound and volume and so on? Yeah, we're just checking. Okay, while mobile app collection is okay to an extent, a lot of the time it's not always obvious where that data is going. And that's something to perhaps consider. For that reason, because mobiles collect a lot of information about you, they can be a target for information or identity compromise, potential blackmail, extortion, or simply invading your privacy and collecting information about you that you're not really aware of. They can be a source of information, a rich source of information for bad guys. They can also be a vector for attack against the organization. Malware can infect the mobile devices. And when I talk about mobile devices, I do tend to include Internet of Things in that as well, because smart devices these days are certainly as intelligent and clever and capable as mobile phones in the office. So the more and more IoT devices are becoming a threat vector. And you'll note there was an actual event where a particular pitch ransomware or malware went from a mobile device over to a smart TV within an environment, automatically crossed over. So the divide between those two technologies is becoming much narrower. Cloud-hosted data is also a risk profile we're looking at today, and that is that your hosted data, which is already there, can be seen as quite a desirable target. It's sort of kind of out of your control, and that's the perception that the bad guys have too. If they feel that it's not being scrutinized as much as you would if you held your data in-house, they might think, oh, that's a softer target or an easier way to get into it. Centralized cloud services, very viable targets for attack. Cloud-hosted data can be compromised en masse, as we've seen many, many times in the media over the last few years. Huge compromise of user credentials, potential loss of data or access to data, compromise of data on these massive platforms that are just rich, target-rich environment. 68 million accounts in Dropbox alone in 2012. So there you go. Data sovereignty, that's the other thing that people probably consider, depending on your business and the sensitivity of data and how much you want to keep it within your own borders, your own country. That is becoming an issue, and many cloud service providers, although when asked, are transparent about that, won't always have a solution for you to keep your data in country, and that's something you may or may need to consider when you're using cloud services. In other words, what laws apply to the data you have stored online? And that's been in the news and the media in the last 12, 18 months. So further in risks, mobile devices themselves. Here's a few threats as delineated by a Kaspersky article recently. Data leakage being a concern. Mobile apps are often unintentionally leaking data. They sometimes store data in caches, and there are some issues sometimes around programming practices for those apps that the data is left between or left on the phone or allowed to other apps to access it. That could be an issue for you. If you're using your mobile and unsecured Wi-Fi, then you know what is happening to it when you're on that Wi-Fi network. What attacks may be happening? Who may be trying to penetrate that device of yours if they know that you're online and they can see you across the tables of the cafe. Network spoofing, i.e., people put up, or organizers put up a fake or honeypot wireless access point to try and lure you in to connect. They may even do it in the same cafe you're trying to access and pretend to be the cafe Wi-Fi, and then they'll grab your credentials or grab some of the information about you, whatever you do online at that point. So that's also a threat or a danger, a risk to your mobile usage. Continuing phishing attacks. Unfortunately, your mobile device being so powerful and capable provides multiple vectors, multiple ways in for people to conduct phishing attacks against you. It's not just email now. They can use SMS, Twitter, any number of social media access points. They can try and fool you or lull you into false security, so you click on the wrong thing and all of a sudden your data's been stolen. So unfortunately, the mobile device being as powerful as it is providing much more attack surface for the bad guys. Spyware, any number of different types of malware might be spyware. Interestingly enough, Kaspersky cites spyware installed by spouses and co-workers and employers to keep track of where you are and what your use patterns are. I thought that was an interesting take on the spyware vector there. So that's intriguing, and it is a threat. It may not be a direct threat to your organization, but you may consider it a bit of an invasion of privacy or another social issue, which we won't go into here. Broken crypto. Unfortunately, there are a number of implementations of crypto on mobile devices that aren't necessarily implemented properly. They may be using weaker algorithms. Strong encryption without proper implementation is not as useful as it might seem. So even if you're using an encrypted or protected app, it just might not be as good as you might read in the white paper about it, and you're just not sure necessarily how well that encryption is implemented. So watch out for that. Do your checks and balances, and find out from the organization whichever crypto you're using, how well they've implemented their systems and what their track record is. And I think the last one, which has been prevalent recently, is another kind of small problem that programmatically apps aren't always necessarily handling session information well enough on the mobile device, and it allows malicious actors, if they've got a way to snoop on your mobile phone, to capture that information, capture those credential information, and then impersonate you as a legitimate user after that. So unfortunately, session handling is a problem on a mobile app that has a lot of apps running all at once, and the data can be accidentally or inadvertently shared between applications where you assumed it was sandboxed. Okay, so what are the other kinds of risks associated with mobile computing? Well, I mentioned before that mobile apps collect your data, and whilst you may not mind, my question is, where is it going? Who's using it? Is it being used for marketing? Do you care about that? Is it being used because people want to sell you stuff, health products, and health equipment and exercise programs and so on? Or is it being used for something slightly more nefarious, or something that can be used against you later on in life, some sort of threat or extortion attempt? So I would ask that question, where is that data going? And if you're not happy with the answer, then I would be turning off those apps or reducing the amount of information they collect. They are very, very useful, and as you can see there from the images on the screen, we're talking about health apps and things like that that helps monitor your state of being and give you good feedback, and it's great, but you need to know where that data is going. If it's a free app that's collecting your data, then what's that app manufacturer getting out of it? What's their return on it? So, continuing vulnerabilities and threats. Well, this is a bit of a quote from McPherson in their threat predictions paper last year. They're saying that user-centric mobile and IoT, or Internet of Things devices, are seeing greater potential for exploitation of personal data. The use of that data, the collection of data is automated, and all they need to do is compromise that device, and they've access to that data. Rogue applications or Trojans, malicious software tools are now out there. There was a couple of incidents or issues publicized recently about Trojans, about malicious software, compromised software being uploaded to app stores where you could download that app, and it was actually a Trojan that would take control of your system, remote access control of your system. Android is not the only one, that's just an example. This certainly happens on other platforms. And they can be a danger to you personally, or a danger to your organization if their intention is for them to collect data about your organization or dig further into it. They provide the ability to spy, and there's a couple of examples. Pokemon Go was targeted. Terrorist sympathizers were targeted. Now, one might be interested in who actually wrote that particular spyware app. And then actually security personnel were targeted as well via social networks and other various distribution channels. So the attackers are being very creative in the way they're coming at the problem. They're not just coming straight in and straight through the front door. They're using various vectors to find out about you and use you when you're at your weakest or most vulnerable. So, and this is the other thing about mobile devices, is that there tends to be a requirement for interaction with other systems, a seamless integration. People want to be able to read their email on their phone, whether they're at lunch or in the office. They want to be able to get their messages and want to be able to schedule appointments. They want to be able to communicate with the boss. They want this stuff in and out as they walk in and out. They don't want it to have to change things or log in to different systems. They just want it to be seamless. And this is a great thing for the organization, making it much more flexible and capable, but it also is a risk that needs to be managed and looked at with some scrutiny. And then there's the usual run of threats that we've kind of already outlined: data leakage, spyware, session handling, and security as a whole. What do we need? We need a robust yet flexible approach. And a bit of a nod to one of my favorite TV programs down there in the graphic in the corner. So forgive me for using humor, but I thought that was kind of funny. The goal, however, of selecting a robust yet flexible approach is maximum usability whilst maintaining reasonable security. I think that's the goal of all IT professionals across the planet. And it's always a tricky sell, especially with mobile security, especially with BYOD. But if you'd like an approach, the mobile security stack, if you like, is characterized by device protection, data protection, and app management. So whatever that means to you, device protection being pins or encryption on the actual device itself, think about having that as a minimum requirement, especially for BYOD devices. Data protection, think about what the data, that's your crown jewels, that's what you're looking after. Worry about where your data is. If it's on a mobile device, is it going from one app to another via session handling vulnerabilities and so on, or have you protected that data? Have you encrypted it at rest? Have you encrypted it in transit? And then the app management itself is a task that you can handle if you've got a corporate policy across corporate devices. But what are your BYOD users using? And just have a guideline or policy around that. And what cloud backends are you using on a day-to-day basis? Are people using Dropbox? Are people using Google Drive to share data between themselves? Because it's awfully easy to pick that message off your email and quickly upload it to Google Drive. Or if the document you're attaching is too large, it automatically offers an opportunity to shove it over to Google Drive and it transports it to the person you're sending it to. But then who's reading on a Google Drive? What's the security around that? So you have to think about those things. What is the cloud backend that you're using day to day? Regulation versus proprietary application environments. This is another choice, a preference perhaps. You might have a multiple of different types of mobile devices inside your environment: Android, iOS, Windows Phone. These are for different kinds of security environments, different styles. Android, there's a lot less regulation, but you can install a lot more of your own security software and you can have management over that. iOS, fairly heavily regulated. Their app store is pretty clean. And they do a lot towards trying to make sure that the apps that they do provide via their store are checked and monitored and blueprinted, and they have very heavy rules about what you can and can't do on their apps. Windows Phone, quite a proprietary operating system, very good for integrating with Windows in your office environment if that's what you want. So, different choices, and you might have a multiple different types of these within your environment, and your choice once again, depending on the features you're after. Now, it's always a case of selling security. The hardest part for me as a security professional is selling security. How much will these security controls impact my productivity? What is the balance between usability and security? Always a drama. Carefully craft your policies is my suggestion, and talk to your people. We'll get a little bit into policy setting a little bit later in the presentation, but it's one of the keystones of any security approach. Just think about how it's going to affect your people and how they're going to perceive it. Human resources, as I mentioned, is probably one of the biggest dramas you'll come across, the hardest tasks you'll have as a security guy. If you have security trolls or you introduce security controls or policies, you'll get a lot of people saying different things about it. They'll go, look, I already know how to do this. I promise I won't do anything wrong, and I don't need these controls on my laptop. CEOs are famous for this. Apologies to any CEOs out there, but I have to speak for my own CEO. Famous for saying, look, I'll be fine. I haven't done anything risky here. I mean, how can you be sure? You really need to convince them of the wisdom of checking at least once or twice now and again. You don't want the perception out there that the security controls are too cumbersome to use, other than they're going to slow me down. I won't be able to do my job. A lot of people will say it's too restrictive, or that these policies are invasions of privacy. And you'll have to have answers for those things. You'll have to have a mechanism. You might even have to have exceptions to the policy depending on what you're trying to achieve. Resource allocation, once again, achieving a balance between security and usability. What are you going to need to implement security controls? It's often, budgets aren't always very high for security in organizations, especially if they've had to think about them down the track. They're still going to do business as usual. They're putting the primary product out there. That's what they care about. Their business is more important than anything else. and budget is often a problem. So if you can come at it from a slow start and sort of ramp up to spending on security and maybe prove the return on investment, that may be an approach you can use, because there's not always an organisation will allocate a large chunk of money to doing this job. So what are the mitigations you can put in place? Well, in my opinion, they sort of fall into three categories. Policy, setting the goals, the intent of what you want to do with regard to security across your organisation. What culture, what status do you want, and make that policy changeable and amendable depending on the business goals and how they change over time. A process or procedure supports the policies. It provides mechanisms and sometimes technical, sometimes personal controls, audits and things around helping people realise or supporting people in following policy. And obviously technical solutions assist in implementing controls on a device. In this case, we're looking at mobiles, but any device in the organisation, technical controls are there, password security, compartmentalization of data, encryption, all these kinds of technologies. So it's a threefold approach. How do we get there? Well, let's consider policy. Here are the tips for policy, in my opinion, going forward. Think about what are the organizational controls you can place on mobile devices. If you own and run or distribute or deploy your own mobile devices from your organization, you can have quite a bit of control over those mobile devices if they ever get compromised, lost, or stolen. You can also provide a policy for use of mobile devices when they're out and about. This would probably apply to BYOD devices just as much as it would to corporately issued devices. Avoiding public Wi-Fi's, checking your device for malware, having a good antivirus on there, having an update antivirus, these kind of standard things that you would do on your desktop. You can easily apply that to a mobile device, and you can just have a perimeter where it comes into the office and you go, okay, you've been in another country or another environment, let's check it for malware, or better, let's just remote wipe it and restore it, and we know we've got a known good configuration on the device. You know, there's different ways around this. As I mentioned, the perimeter and policy on BYOD, this is pretty important, especially when it comes to visitors, people coming into your organization, bringing devices into the environment. Do you allow them on the guest network? What is the policy that you ask them to adhere to when they're in your environment, when they're using your guest network? What IoT devices do you allow inside the organization? I mean, hands up here, who's got a smart TV on the wall of their office that they use for all sorts of presentation techniques? I mean, these things are fantastic. But they've got a computer in them, guys, and they do a lot more than they ever do on the surface. So they're not just a TV anymore. Have to think about how they're connected to the net and if they've got any vulnerabilities or issues around them. Organizational policy on cloud use devices. Cloud services. Cloud services are used ubiquitously, seamlessly by everybody, and sometimes you don't even realize you're using the cloud. I mean, people use Gmail for years and years and years before they realized that we're actually using cloud service, right? And it wasn't termed that way before, but it has exactly the same issues and risks involved, regardless. And if people are used to these technologies, they won't think about them in terms of what is the security over this stuff. So think about what it is where your cloud services are, where your data is, what sovereignty you have over that data, what encryption if you need it, what security, and what third-party agreements you've got in place for protection of that data. And I guess marry your cloud, your BYOD policies, and your organizational goals together with the usage needs of specific requirements of the organization. What services are used now? What do you need? And how's the data stored and accessed? Think about those things, and you can build a policy and a procedure base around that will work for you and enable your organization to probably even do their job even better, and with more security in tow. So you can do this. It's not too much of an ask, and it does work, and it makes people feel more calm and peaceful about using these devices sometimes, even when they know the organization's behind them. So to support policy, you need process and procedures. Consider when you're onboarding staff, what do you tell them when they first walk in the door? Educate them about your policies. Get them to agree to comply to your policies. Have a non-disclosure agreement and help them understand. Put it in as much simple language as you possibly can. Point out all the policy documentation you've got and allow them some time to absorb that. Run a little workshop. have information sessions, have lunchtime briefings, do all those kinds of things that will help your organisation engage with the security policy and help you to help your organisation do the right thing and get everything on the same page. When you're selecting new equipment, services, mobile or cloud, consider the security features that they have. There are more new services every day and more new mobile platforms to consider. Black phones and other really super secret encrypted phones are available if that's the level you want to go to protect your communications. What is the profile of the vendor that you're buying from? And do they have any third parties obligationary things built into their contracts? If not, maybe you need one with them, an agreement that they're going to take care of security incidents or issues at their end when they happen. How are they protecting your interests at their organisation? It's very important to get that very clear. You know, if all the onus is on you, then you may need to consider tighter controls over the data before you upload. Introduction of new equipment into the office needs to be integrated with existing systems, tested and monitored for unknown or undocumented features, things that might happen as a result of introducing something new into the environment. You know, a system is always greater than the sum of its parts, so you will see emergent behaviours from new equipment, and you need to have a benchmark in the first place, and then see what happens after you introduce a new piece of equipment. And have a methodology for maintaining security of mobile devices. How do you check them every 6 months? Do you update the AV on them? Do you wipe them periodically? If it's a corporate device, do you just wipe them every 3 months and just start fresh? How often do you upload and back them up? Those kind of things. Just to cover your bases. If there is an investigation, you need information and data and logging and journaling on those devices to find out where the attack came from and if they were in fact the vector for attack. Technical controls. Obviously, you can do a lot of stuff at the network perimeter. BYOD devices are obviously something you want to monitor, especially if you are allowing folks to bring any kind of mobile device in there and you're not putting a lot of restrictions on those mobile devices, then BYOD devices are a source of threat for you. IoT devices I mentioned already, they kind of fall into the same basket. Wi-Fi, if you're going to provide Wi-Fi for visitors, then consider the policies and controls around that. What are you going to allow those folks to do? Are you going to allow them into your corporate network, or is it just purely a guest Wi-Fi that just provides them internet access? Make sure you have a set of checklists and standard configurations and patching policies about all your mobile devices. Anti-malware, as I mentioned before, installed on mobile devices. At least an agreement by a person who owns a BYOD device that they will maintain AV on it, even if it's not a corporate-owned AV. But for corporate-owned assets, this is a bit easier. But regardless, even if you've got a corporate checklist for security for a mobile phone, you can still hand that to one of your staff and say, look, here's our recommendations. Feel free to implement this stuff yourself personally on your BYOD device. And they might just go, beauty, work's given me something I could take home. Great. That's a great way to engage your staff. And then obviously you want to monitor the activity of all mobile devices inside your environment, probably for anomalous issues, data exfiltration, any of these kinds of things that might happen, whether intentionally or otherwise. Remember, mobile devices can have Trojans or malware on them that do things stealthily and exfiltrate data without the person knowing. So that person may not be a bad guy. They just may have brought in an unclean device. And you can hopefully detect that problem and let them know about it and then solve that as you go along. So you can, as I say, you can help your staff and you can have a no-blame environment. If it's an unfortunate incident, you can have a no-blame environment, and that will encourage people to report on these problems, and it will make them feel better about an investigation when they know that they're not going to get hold over the coals for it. And yeah, looking for suspicious activity is relatively easy once you've got a benchmark. So let's just jump into case studies. I've got a couple. Oh, we're just going to pause for just a sec.
Yeah, we'll just pause for a quick second if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I've just noticed a couple of hands have been raised up here. I just want to check that all is
getting through to everybody. Yeah.
Okay, audio is not smooth to hear.
Oh, okay. Perhaps it's me. Perhaps I'm not close enough.
Okay. Other than that, we're good to go.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So the first one is actually a hypothetical. It is. It's often difficult to get real case studies with a lot of detail in them, or precisely the detail you want in order to illustrate a point. But I found this one that someone had created, and I suspect strongly it's actually based on real events, although they don't admit to that. So, take it as you would. But this is Jane's story. So Jane Davis is the marketing manager at Vulnerable Corporation. She has a big job. She's got an upcoming product launch, and she wants to do some work from home. She's been pulling 14-hour days at the office, and she's so tired. She needs to spend a bit more time at home, even if it's just now and then, with her family. So she's taking her work home, and that's fine. Everybody's cool with that. Now she needs to integrate a whole bunch of different data from different sources. She wants to analyze that data as a whole, aggregate that data, and have a look at it, and then derive some results from that, and then put it into the product launch. Now, she downloads the customer data into a bunch of spreadsheets. She emails those spreadsheets to her Gmail account. Then she goes home and she downloads them to her Android tablet at home. All good, although she didn't tell IT she was doing this. They may have had some tips for her, but hey, say the V, it didn't seemed pretty harmless at the time. So she gets started on it, and she realizes that it's a massive task. It's going to take her longer than she has, and she really needs some help. So she calls out to her colleagues, who are all more than happy to give her a hand. And she chops up the work into chunks and sends out those different parts to her colleagues via box.com. Shares the task out with her colleagues. She actually sets up, sets up a Box account, uses a credit card, gets usernames for all the 20 people in the marketing department, and then sends up all the spreadsheets to the Box account, and allows those people to download those via their mobile apps and so on to their devices. All good, fantastic. So we're working away, we're beavering away, and what happened was that the marketing team did a fantastic job. The product launch was a roaring success, absolutely huge pats on the back for everybody concerned. The data analysis just was one of the most successful marketing campaigns in the company's history. And as a reward, the company and Jane organize a great party at a nightclub nearby. They have a fantastic night. And unfortunately, the next morning, Jane wake up a little bit foggy. And she realizes she left her purse at the bar. Oh, well, have to go pick it up. Problem was, she kept her Android tablet in her purse. And oops. Now, Jane never set any security policies for her Box account. She didn't really, it was too rushed. She had to do it and didn't think about it. Unfortunately, anybody can access the app on her phone. They don't need to re-enter a username or password. Somebody at the bar potentially overnight had full access to Vulnerable's customer data. Now, was hoping the person just wanted to wipe the tablet and sell it, on the black market or something. Maybe, though, the person knew how to look for sensitive company data. We don't know. Jane doesn't know. Jane went and retrieved it, her purse minus the phone, and she went, oh, well, I better change my Box account. So, I'll make sure it's secured from now on, just in case somebody accessed it in the past. She goes on about her day. Unfortunately, she didn't consider any of the ramifications, and there was a potential for this to go seriously pear-shaped. There's a scenario that you can imagine if you're under pressure. The boss comes to you Friday afternoon and says, Mark, I need this done by Monday. I'm sorry, you're going to have to work through the weekend. The last thing you're thinking about necessarily is the security of the data. You just jam it onto whatever USB sticks you've got, whatever devices you've got. You race home with it. You work crazy over the weekend on a home computer, and then the next day, all you care about is getting the report back to your boss on Monday morning. And maybe you missed something along the way. You've worked crazy hours, and you may have just made some mistakes. And this is a scenario that could happen. So there's some. Some lessons in that we can think about. But I'll move on to the next couple of examples, and then we'll talk about some lessons. So this is a real world example. You probably recognize this guy. Back in June 2011, Dropbox accidentally allowed users to log into their accounts without a password. In other words, all you've had to have was an email address and you could log into anyone's account. Now, Dropbox reported that this was only affecting 1% of their users, and they resolved the issue within a few hours of it being detected. So, you know, minimal damage. They fought the fire, they mitigated the problem, and they were fine. You know, reasonable job. Okay. Unfortunately, in 2012, something else happened. Some hackers got in and grabbed a good chunk of their login credentials, encrypted login credentials. They downloaded them. The credentials were protected for a variety of algorithms, assaulted passwords, and at the time, Dropbox advised all the users to change their passwords, just in case the bad guys had access to supercomputer resources and they could crack the passwords from the data dump. So everybody changed the passwords. Okay, that's all good. We're fine. They were a little bit vague about the numbers this time around. They didn't sort of admit to how many exactly accounts. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they had to do a full investigation to find out the extent of the hack. However, it was 4 years later that it was finally revealed the scope of the impact of the problem. That 68 million accounts were compromised. That's a lot of people. Now I'm interested. Would be interested to know how many of those people actually did go ahead and change their passwords. That's a lot of people to get the message out to and to realize and to make a change to. And there's probably enough time for the bad guys to have cracked at least a few. So my guess is an awful lot of data was compromised during that 4 year time span. Maybe not everybody got the message, and the scope was certainly not revealed. Whether Dropbox knew it was the extent of it, I'm not sure. I'm not trying to blame them for anything here, but that gives you a little idea of how long it took them to work out exactly the impact of it and to be brave enough to admit it. I'm not sure if that was the entire user base, but it looks a large number. So that was pretty serious, and it gives you a bit of an idea of a cloud breach and what impact it can have. Now, let's face it, Dropbox is still operating, so it didn't get out of business over this, but I would imagine if you're a smaller company, you might just have a little trouble staying on your legs. So, you know, there's just a couple of case studies that kind of try to illustrate a little bit of the dangers involved in using mobile computing and using cloud-based services. I am not saying don't use them. I mean, for goodness sakes, my organization advocates use of cloud. That's what we do. We help people secure their data on the cloud. So we're not going to say to you, don't use cloud, for goodness sakes. It's already out there. We're using it. There's no turning back. But be aware of the risks. That is the absolute key to this. I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but just in case you haven't thought about it or you haven't made your management aware of it, this is really important stuff. Take steps to mitigate any risks of mobile usage, especially BYOD. I can't stress that enough. It is a very common thing for people to have the BYOD and IoT devices in the office. And I don't know how many organizations have really looked seriously at this issue. And it could be a vector of attack, a very sneaky one that comes up to bite you. So be aware those implications and some of the things I've already mentioned. Just thinking forward, IoT sensors, it's been cited in your own Computer Society Cybersecurity Guide that IoT devices and sensors are likely to overtake mobile phones as the largest category of connected devices. Therefore, they provide a big attack surface. So watch out, smart TVs. We're going to see a lot more of compromises via IoTs. And you might have heard a little while back there was a 1 terabit, I think, terabits per second denial of service attack against a well-known security researcher using IoT compromised devices. So a bunch of smart TVs got together and attacked this poor security researcher, and like he probably wasn't expecting that. I mean, that's serious stuff. So it's a real threat. Opportunities for profit-seeking criminals are certainly unclear as to what they get out of that. You know, reputational damage maybe for the people involved or the devices involved, perhaps. It's yet to come. There's a few comments in the McAfee threat predictions paper there. Additionally, you know, as mobile malware continues its growth throughout this year, we notice a trend. It's teaming up with ransomware, banking trojans, and remote access tools. There's one I've cited earlier in the presentation, a remote access tool on a mobile. So these are some of the leading threats that have been predicted for the next year or two. These devices are powerful, as I mentioned before. They're a very strong vector for attack against your organization. I would manage them carefully, but you know, consider the use of them, of course, and your organization. You don't want to shut it down, but you really do want to manage them properly. That's kind of where I wanted to go today. I'm more than happy to take, if we've got time for some questions. And go take a look at some questions you guys might have posted. So
great. Thank you, Mark. I was just having a vision of the attack of the TV.
Yeah, evil TV face.
Just a vision in my head. We've got a few questions that have come through. Thanks for sending through, everyone. So I'll just go through them one by one, and Mark will attempt to answer them the best way that he can. Please keep them coming through. We've got another 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. While we've got him here, the expert on security, throw your questions at him. So we'll just go to the first question from David, David Lynn. I hope that's said correctly, David. The question is, what steps are needed to protect both the device and data stored on the device and apps?
Okay, so device security, I think I mentioned 3 levels. Thank you for picking up on that. The device security, you want to consider, at the very least, a PIN for your devices. Believe it or not, the current minimum recommendation for PINs is about 10 digits. I don't know many people who use that many. Certainly 4 or 6-digit PINs are starting to become too weak, crackable by various apps and mechanical devices. I've actually seen punching the buttons on the keypad and breaking into them. So consider a PIN of 6 or more digits if that's your if you can handle that. My advice would be just to have 2 PINs that you can remember put together. But anyway, also obviously biometrics are great for that. If you've got a phone, a lot of smartphones now have got your biometric reader on there. That's great. Use that. I mean, every little bit helps. Layering protection on for the device. And when you do enter a PIN on a device, a lot of things like the iPhone will automatically assume you want to encrypt your data, and that's great. If you don't have any data encryption automatically, consider placing that on your system, especially if it's a critical device that's using corporate data. So consider encryption. And you can definitely get stuff for Android. There are a lot of apps and tools out there to do encryption on your phone. So consider encrypting your device. That means if it falls in the wrong hands and gets lost, it's largely immune to anybody but people with massive supercomputer resources. Now, data and apps on your phone. I think apps really come down to managing which apps you download, checking the origins of them, the profile of the organization, where they're coming from. You've got a little bit of more heads up if you, a little bit more lead if you're using apps from the App Store, but I'm not saying they're more necessarily superior to ones you can get on Android or other platforms. But be aware of where you're getting these apps from, and understand the profile of the organization, what track record they've had, and be sure to check the signatures. If you're downloading apps from non-App Store places, from the internet websites, check the signatures on them, do the checksums to make sure they're bona fide copies of the apps instead of rogue copies of them that might be compromised. So worry about the origin of your apps more than anything else. And then beyond that, data on the phone, you'll have different ways of handling this. Android is a little more open in the way that it shares data between apps. Once again, you do have controls over this. You can put shells and other secure sandboxes on the Android. Apple iPhones do it kind of automatically. They do sandbox a lot better by default, and so your apps shouldn't be sharing as much data with other apps unless you tell it that you're allowed to. Consider whenever you install an app to look at the permissions that ask what it's asking you. Can I access your address book? Can I access your geodata? All that stuff. Be aware of the choices you're making there. So there's that 3 sort of levels of approach. Your app management, what apps you're allowed by policy to install, and what apps you actually encourage people to have. Whitelist if you have the ability to do that for the corporation. Whitelist the apps that you would otherwise upload to your devices. Make a recommendation list on ones that you know are good, known good, and the sources from where you can get those. And yeah, consider PIN and encryption on your phones, and certainly consider the platform, the security features that you may be selecting, whether it be Windows Phone, whether it be iOS, or whether it be Android. And I'm not saying any of those devices are better than others. I'm saying they're different fits for different people's purposes. And I know colleagues in my area of expertise who have got Android phones, and they're well happy with how they control them. So don't be fooled. It's not a proprietary versus proprietary argument. It's about how you apply the security features of that device. So choose based on your own preferences and what the feature sets are.
Yeah, that's interesting you say, Mark, with the permissions on apps, because I go back to an experience I had with a health fund where you can download the app and they ask for your permission to use your contacts. And I'm like, no way are you getting that. I find that very strange that they would actually allow that to happen from an organisational perspective. I know why they do it, but they didn't win my business in that area.
And you have a choice. I mean, I hope you have a choice.
Yeah, well, if you want to use the app, you've got to, but so I'm not using the app. So.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the next question is from Margaret Turner. I might need to help answer this one as well.
Okay, fine.
To access this webinar, I had to download the free app from Zoom.
Right.
What does this say about the ACS?
Interesting.
All I know is that when we looked at Zoom, we did make sure that it was they were very reliable, trustworthy signatures. They were very, very reliable company. They don't share their data with any third party. We checked that. Of course, we don't share our data as well. So you won't get anything third party from us and Zoom in that department. So I'm
pretty sure Zoom make the free app because it promotes the use of the paid for system in corporate. So if they did anything silly or dastardly with the free app, then they'd be really hurting their own business. They want people to be able to connect to seminars like this. And I do recall when the ACS was looking at Zoom a little while back, because I was kind of involved with the process a little bit along there, looking at the due diligence along that organisation. So yeah, it was certainly examined at the time, and we look at track record of the company. I mean, it's a lot. You can get a lot from looking at who the people are who are supplying you. And you can get recommendations from other people about that too. So I'm pretty sure we did that.
Yeah, with Nick. So
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is from Jadadeep Chauhan. I hope I've said that properly. Can cloud service providers decrypt the user data?
Only if they have your private key. Now, this is an interesting question. It's a great question because some organizations, some cloud providers will allow you to recover your access to your data if you lose your private key. And that's kind of cool because, you have your private key when you start off, and who knows, you lose the actual USB stick you had it on, or you lose the computer, or the computer gets wiped, or whatever have you, and you lose your access to your data. And you cannot decrypt it without that. And some cloud services will offer you an opportunity to store a copy of your private key with them. Now that's great because they can help you then recover. But technically, it does mean that could access your data with that private key in hand if they're actually holding it themselves. My advice would be, if you have the option, use a third party, a trusted third party, to hold a copy of your private key, or store it somewhere off site with someone else that you then could request that back from them. And in fact, you could even ask that third party, if they're an actual organization, to verify your identity to make sure you are who you say you are when you're requesting access to that private key. That's one way to protect yourself. And so even though it's annoying to have to manage your own private key access to your encrypted data on the cloud, there are ways around it that you can protect yourself and still have that comfort zone without necessarily handing the keys to your kingdom over to your cloud provider. Now, having said that, a lot of cloud providers out there, their reputation would be in absolute tatters if they did the wrong thing. So, got to remember that you're still dealing with an organization who has a profile to maintain. And if they're offering security, then they better well stand behind it. Otherwise, they're out of business, right? Yeah. So, there's still swings and roundabouts, and you need to do a risk assessment on that. But if you believe that there's a danger, that there's a risk to your access to your systems, and you don't want people having your private key, then don't give it to them. Say thank you very much to the cloud provider and say we'll handle it ourselves, and seek a third-party assistance. I mean, that's probably the best advice I could provide.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
The next one is from Siva Shankar Malineni. I'm sorry if I get these wrong. Does antivirus applications really work for mobile?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like antivirus on PC, antivirus on servers. they all work they're doing the best job they can do. And, you know, are they bulletproof? Absolutely not. That's why you have multiple layers or levels of security. I wouldn't suggest installing multiple antivirus software on your device, because that's often a recipe for disaster. But there are certainly reasonably reputable AVs out there. There's paid for and free ones, and I would suggest taking a look at VirusTotal and a few other websites that do comparisons. The trustworthiness, or the effectiveness of antivirus is monitored constantly by the community, by the information security community, and they do rate AV applications against each other. So I would say play the field, look at the comparison websites, and make sure you're selecting the best of breed. You may have to change your AV every month, but, you know, so be it if you want to stay on top of the game. Is it bulletproof? No, of course not. Nothing is, but it's certainly worthwhile having. I would rather have it than not. Absolutely.
Okay, next question. How do we secure IoT devices without installing any anti-malware?
Yeah, a really great question. And the short answer is you may not be able to do anything to the device itself. It may not have an ability for you to add security. Therefore, a lot of IoT devices, you're literally going to have to step back from them and say, okay, what are they connected to? How can they damage me? Where is my sandbox going to be? And you may choose not to allow an IoT device to access your corporate network. You may decide that you're going to have it on the guest network only, the Wi-Fi guest network, and you're going to treat it like a foreign or a hostile device. That would be my best advice. Also, find out if your devices like cameras and things like that are powered down, or pardon me, when they're not disconnected, or if they're in standby mode, whether they're able to still access the camera. I'd be a little tiny paranoid about that in sensitive areas of your organization. So if you've got a camera sitting in your boardroom, I would be switching it off at the wall if you don't need it. That kind of obvious but fairly easily implemented solution could go far. You could turn off your IoT devices if you're not sure about them. Turn them off when they're not in use, and bear in mind that they may be connected to networks. Now, I'll say this, some IoT devices are a lot smarter than others. Take the Apple TV, for example. It's got a lot of ways to talk to the network. It's got Bluetooth access. It can pair with other Apple devices in your organization. It can get around or get through your network in different ways. So be aware these devices are very clever, and they will take a route through your network if they can't find the normal way through. So be aware that you may want to turn Bluetooth off on these devices, or you may need to power them down when you're not using them. And understand that you can add security to some of these things. They can have pins and stuff on them. That's great, but not all IoT devices will have the security on them built in, or your ability to add it to them. So you need to sandbox them effectively. You know, to cordon them off, put them in a walled garden, and know what that device has got access to, and if you don't trust it.
Interesting. Okay. After hearing Jane's story, is it safe to use Android phones?
Yeah, and as I said before, don't get me wrong, just because I mentioned Android as an example, I mean, Jane didn't actually implement any security controls on that. So unfortunately for Jane, she kind of made her own bed to lie in there. Could she have done things? Absolutely. If she'd have talked to the IT department before she took data off site, she might have had a better chance of defending her iPhone. It might not have mattered that her Android phone got nicked and stolen at the nightclub. You know, she might have just said, oh, well, don't worry about it. I'll just get IT to block the phone, to erase it or brick it from here. That might have been a solution for her, but because she left it completely open with no security, she kind of cooked her own goose on that. So unfortunately, yeah. But is Android more vulnerable? Absolutely not. And as I say, I have several colleagues of mine in the security business who love their Android. They're more than happy to secure it. They do due diligence on it, and they find apps and software and configurations that make that device usable. So yeah, absolutely. You know, Android is flexible, and you know, from a system administrator's perspective, I used to be a system administrator. The more flexibility, the better. I could control the environment myself, more hands-on. So in a way, Android is more able to you know what it's doing. A lot of the time, you kind of have to trust iOS and what Apple say about their phone. by and large, it's true. So don't worry. You do have what they say they're going to give you, because, as I say, their reputation depends on it. So any security company or any company selling security will always have their reputation at risk. And if you can prove otherwise, then they're sunk. So they will stand behind their products. So Apple will provide a rather kind of a toaster-like environment where it protects you from yourself a little bit more. Android provides a bit more flexible environment where you get control. Use as you see fit, whatever suits you in terms of features.
Okay. We've got one, or how many more have we got here? We've got a fair few questions, which is great. Just looking at the time, how are you, Mark? 2, 4, 6, 7 more to go, or 5 to go.
A couple more.
Yeah. Would you like to pick one of the ones here?
Let's see. Goodness.
It's very small text.
Yeah, I don't think it should be prohibited to bring. Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's one, Ali Ahmad Shahzada, sorry if I'd got that wrong, asks, don't you think it should be prohibited for organizations' data to go onto flash drives, or to bring organizations' data onto flash drives? It doesn't matter whether they're going to do some work on the weekend or not. Actually, that could be a policy. You could decide that you don't allow flash drives or mobile devices to take data out of the organizational perimeter. In that case, there are other ways to do that. You can allow access to your corporate systems via secure links from home, if that's in fact what they need to do. If people need to work from home and you allow it, then there's other ways to do that. You can provide secure communications back to your corporate systems, or you can host your data on a secure cloud and allow people access to that. You may want to impose a requirement to use a VPN, a virtual private network, from your home computer, so that your communications from your computer to the corporate or the computer to the cloud is encrypted. And there's plenty of free and paid for VPN solutions around. So, there are certainly ways to do this. Your Digital File has a secure cloud storage mechanism that we can do secure sharing and secure access from the web. So all you need is a web user, a web platform to get access to your corporate data, and it's secure end-to-end and at rest. So there are plenty of solutions out there to use to share data between staff and colleagues, and to share data to and from home. And you can certainly you can find those solutions out there. So maybe that is a way to do it. And as I said, you may decide that that's a good policy. It's easier not to allow USB sticks into the organisation, or to transport data on those USB sticks. You just say, look, it's too hard to secure, too hard to lock down. We're going to use an alternative solution. But if you need to provide your staff the ability to work remotely, then you have to think of something for them. Whether that be a shell access directly into your corporate systems, or whether it be some sort of file transfer that happens between your corporates and your home use. That's up to you how you'd like to implement it. But I would suggest thinking around the problem. As I say, sometimes it's easier to just cease and desist on a particular device, but you've got to think about what flexibility have you just destroyed there, and how are you going to promote better productivity from your staff by allowing them to be flexible in some other way. And so, yeah, I would promote that idea of thinking before you make a carte blanche decision on allowing devices in or out of the organisation.
Another one from Ali Ahmad, which is a good question. What do you suggest for the graduates in network security to enter into the job market when we don't have any past experience, but the companies usually require experienced people for most of the roles?
Okay, so we're talking career path here, or we start the areas of study. I mean, I would suggest there are different paths into computer security. If in fact IT security is where you want to go, or where you want to be in a couple of years' time, there are different paths into it. One of the paths that commonly for my colleagues has been work in system administration and management of computer systems, because quite often that task involves security. It involves implementing some security controls, and you get used to the way of thinking around security and how to maintain control over the environments. And it's often a gateway to IT security as a direct profession. So if you can prove or have a track record or a profile of having worked at an organization where part of your job was security, then you've got a leg up. This is how I got into it. I was an admin. I was a sysadmin for a long time, and I learned about security on the job. And then I landed a position as a junior in an organization that would then train me on the job to be better at security. So I didn't have a qualification going in as such that said security on it, but I'd been a system administrator, and that system administrator role had involved understanding security and how to secure systems and that and user access. One other path might be a programmer if you are involved in implementing robust secure code. That's another way to understand security, and you can be an analyst or a principal analyst in an organization that has a look at the software code base that people are developing and say, well, look, actually, guys, you've introduced some security bugs into your software here. I happen to know that because I was involved in this project. So you can sort of leapfrog your way in that way. A programmer is just as able to get into security as a sysadmin or a database admin. Any of those roles can be a gateway towards it. You don't necessarily need a security certification per se to get into the security industry. Sometimes it's just getting a little bit of exposure. And you know, there are other career paths that you can qualify for immediately, then you can go out and then learn stuff on the job. Obviously, getting into an organization that has security as part of their mandate is helpful. So perhaps if you could get involved with government projects or other places where they'll require it, any organization that deals with sensitive data is going to have some modicum of security involved, and you might be able to get onto the projects that implement that stuff. And anybody who writes policy is going to have something to do with security, whether it be hands-on or whether it just be staff and personnel security. That's just as valuable for a security professional as hands-on knowledge of technical systems. Believe me, it actually gets bigger than Ben-Hur. Writing policy about for an organization is more about the people and less about the technology. Technology is understood. You can get tools to do that. People, you've got to train them, mold them, and educate them and engage them. It's a bigger job than you ever would imagine. So, you know, the people process is just as valuable. Goodness, I have more to do with HR in my organization a lot of the time than I do with the technical guys. So there you go. It's a kind of an interesting end of career sort of goal to have. Is not necessarily always going to be a techie if you're in the security space. There's lots of different roles.
Yes, yeah. The world is your oyster.
Yeah.
Just pick
a
path that might change, you might not.
Yeah.
It'll get you there in the end. Okay, well, we don't have any time for any more questions, but what we'll do is I'll get these questions to Mark, and we'll get them out to the participants in the presentation today, along with your CPRs, etc., like that. So without further ado, thanks so much, Mark, for coming today, and thanks everyone for being here today. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. We have to go now. So yeah, thanks again, and this will be up on YouTube in the next couple of days. If you have any questions, please email me or call the office, and we'll be more than happy to help. Thanks again, and stay lovey.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Recorded. Okay.
Did I stop recording? Stop share.